Pope John then pronounced the sentence of condemnation upon Leo VIII, declared him deposed from all sacerdotal honors and all clerical functions, with a perpetual curse if he should attempt to re-enter the city of Rome. He degraded from their station all who had been ordained by Leo, requiring all of them to appear before him in their clerical robes, and to write with their own hand the confession, "My Father, having nothing himself, could not lawfully give me anything." John then solemnly reinstated them all exactly as they were before. He next had brought before him 3 of the partisans of Leo and Otto. Of one of these he caused the right hand to be cut off. Another he caused to be horribly mutilated, and the third he caused to be whipped almost to death. Not long afterward, John the 12th, still in the practice of his vices, was killed by the just indignation of a husband whose home he had invaded. At the death of this terrible John, Benedict V, 964, succeeded to the papal throne, though Leo VIII, who had been driven out by John, was still living. At the time Leo VIII was appointed pope by the emperor, the prelates and people, Benedict amongst them had taken an oath to acknowledge no other pope than Leo while he lived, and not to allow any pope to be ordained without the emperor's consent. Nevertheless, John was no sooner dead than they all followed up their rebellion in restoring him by electing and ordaining Benedict. But as soon as the emperor heard of it, he marched to Rome. Benedict defended the city against him, himself mounting the ramparts, clothed in his pontifical habit, with a battle-axe in his hands, and from the top of the walls launched anathemas upon his assailants, and beat back the enemy who mounted to the assault. Otto, however, captured the city and the pope. He reinstated Leo VIII, 964, and then assembled a council. Benedict was brought before the council in his full pontifical robes, when the cardinal archdeacon addressed him thus: "By what authority or by what law hast thou assumed these ornaments in the lifetime of the venerable Pope Leo, whom thou madest choice of together with us in the room of John, whom we all condemned and rejected? Canst thou deny thy having promised upon oath to the emperor never to choose nor to ordain a pope without his consent, or that of his son, King Otto?" Benedict answered, "I have sinned. Take pity on me." The emperor asked the council to deal mercifully with Benedict, provided he acknowledged his fault in the hearing of the whole council. At these words, Benedict, throwing himself at Leo's feet and the emperor's, owned aloud that he was a usurper, and begged the pope, the emperor, and the council to forgive him. He then took off his pall and delivered it to the pope, with the pastoral staff, which Leo immediately broke, and showed it thus broken to the people. After this, Leo ordered him to sit down on the ground, and having stripped him in that posture of all the pontifical ornaments, he pronounced the following sentence: "We divest Benedict, who has usurped the Holy Apostolic See, of the pontifical dignity and the honor of priesthood. However, at the request of the emperor, who has restored us, we allow him to retain the order of deacon, but upon condition that he quits Rome and goes into perpetual banishment." The place of his exile was Hamburg in Germany. Leo VIII died at the beginning of March 965. The Romans sent an ambassador to Otto, who was then in Saxony, to ask him to name a successor. Otto was so pleased at this token of respect that he gave them full liberty themselves to choose the new pope, and they immediately chose Benedict, whom had been exiled to Hamburg. To this the emperor even consented. But while these negotiations were being carried on between Rome and Saxony, Benedict died July 965. Then the Romans unanimously chose the Bishop of Narni, who became Pope John XIII, October 1, 965. Although he had been unanimously chosen, he acted so tyrannically that before the end of the year he was unanimously driven out. He took refuge in Capua, whence he appealed to the emperor, who in 966 again marched to Rome, restored John to the pontifical throne, and he and the Pope took a terrible vengeance upon the leaders of those who had driven out John. After this, John was suffered to occupy the papal chair until his death, September 5, 972. He was succeeded by Benedict VI, December 972 to 973. Otto the Great died May 7, 973. This was no sooner known in Rome than there occurred a violent insurrection led by Crescentius, governor of Rome, who was the grandson of Theodora and Pope John X. He invaded the Lateran palace, seized Pope Benedict VI, cast him into a dungeon where, soon afterward, he was strangled, and Franken ascended the papal throne as Pope Boniface VII, 974. But within a month he was driven out. He took all the treasures and all the sacred vessels from the Church of St. Peter and fled to Constantinople. The faction that had driven him out placed in the papal chair Benedict VII, 975 to 984. Benedict was no sooner ordained than he assembled a council in the Lateran by which he deposed, excommunicated, and anathematized Franken, Boniface VII. By the support of Otto II, Benedict was able to maintain himself on the papal throne, for they simply terrorized the city. The emperor and the pope prepared in the Vatican a sumptuous entertainment to which were invited the grandees of Rome, the magistrates, and the deputies of the neighboring cities. Otto at first labored to inspire his guests with joy. Perfumed wines were poured out in profusion. Exquisite dishes succeeded each other without interruption on the table, and the brightest gaiety shone on every face. Then, upon a signal from the prince, a troop of soldiers suddenly entered the festive hall, with their drawn swords in their hands, and 3 guards placed themselves behind each guest. A spectacle so strange filled their hearts with fright, and the dread increased when an officer of the palace, displaying a long list, called out in a loud voice the unfortunate men who were destined for the executioner. 60 victims were led from the banquet hall and pitilessly massacred. During this butchery, Otto and the Pope preserved the same amenity in their words and gestures. They pledged their guests in the best wines and pointed out to them the most delicious dishes. But the frightful image of death was before all eyes, and their faces remained icy with terror. At length the horrible banquet was concluded. In the time of Benedict VII, the thirst for money had grown so great that they even sold the right to seats in the churches, from whence has arisen the traffic in chairs in the churches, which has been perpetuated to our own times, and still brings in immense revenues to the clergy. Benedict was succeeded by John XIV, July 983. But when he had reigned 8 months, he was deposed, imprisoned, and either starved or poisoned by Boniface VII, March 984, who had returned from Constantinople and had been able to raise sufficient power thus to seize upon the papal throne. However, his career ended in less than a year. At the conclusion of a debauch, he died of apoplexy or of poison, and by the populace his dead body was torn from its coffin, was dragged through the streets, and was hung up by the feet at the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. John XV, 986 to 996, was the next pope. He was soon driven out by Crescentius, who was able to make terms by which he was allowed to resume the throne without having to contest it with another pope. During his pontificate, King Hugh Capet assembled a council at Reims to try the Archbishop of Reims for treason. The king wrote and sent ambassadors to the pope to inform him of this. The bishops of the See of Reims also wrote to the pope to testify to the horror with which the treason of their superior inspired them. But neither to the king nor to the bishops did the Pope make any reply whatever. The representatives of the king and the bishops went 3 days in succession to the Pope's palace in Rome, each time waiting all day for some sort of a message, but they were utterly ignored and were obliged to return to France without any answer. The council assembled July 17, 991. Since the Pope had completely ignored them all, it became necessary for them first of all to establish canonically the authority of the council. Some of the arguments by which this was done are worth quoting here. In the name of the king, the Bishop of Orleans delivered a speech, the substance of which, if not the speech itself, had been composed by Gerbert, the secretary of the Archbishop of Reims, who had been educated in the Mohammedan school of Cordova. In it are the following passages. We believe, my brethren, we should always honor the Roman Church in memory of St. Peter, and we do not pretend to place ourselves in opposition to the Pope. We, however, owe an equal obedience to the Council of Nice and the rules laid down by the Fathers. We should consequently distrust the silence of the Pope and his new ordinances, in order that his ambition or cupidity may not prejudice the ancient canons, which should always remain in force. Have we attained the privilege of the court of Rome by assembling regularly? No. If the Pope is commendable for his intelligence and his virtues, we have no censor to fear. If, on the contrary, the Holy Father suffers himself to err through ignorance or passion, we should not listen to him. We have seen upon the throne of the Apostle a Leo and a Gregory, pontiffs admirable for their wisdom and science, and yet the bishops of Africa opposed the vaunting pretensions of the court of Rome because they foresaw the evils under which we now suffer. In fact, Rome has much degenerated. After having given shining lights to Christianity, it now spreads abroad the profound darkness which is extending over future generations. Have we not seen John the 12th plunged in ignoble pleasures, conspire against the emperor, cut off the nose, right hand, and tongue of the deacon John, and massacre the first citizens of Rome? Boniface VII, that infamous parricide, that dishonest robber, that trafficker in indulgences, did he not reign under our very eyes? To such monsters full of all infamy, void of all knowledge, human and divine, are all the priests of God to submit, men distinguished throughout the world for their learning and holy lives? The Roman pontiff, who so sins against his brother, who, often admonished, refuses to hear the voice of counsel, is as a publican and a sinner. Though he be seated on a lofty throne, glittering with purple and gold, if he be thus without charity, thus puffed up by vain knowledge, is he not Antichrist? He is an image, an idol, whom to consult is to consult a stone. We must, however, avow that we are ourselves the cause of this scandal. For if the see of the Latin Church, before resplendent, is now covered with shame and ignominy, it is because we have sacrificed the interests of religion to our dignity and grandeur. It is because we have placed in the first rank him who deserves to be in the last. Do you not know that the man whom you place upon a throne will allow himself to be beguiled by honors and flatteries, and will become a demon in the temple of Christ? You have made the popes too powerful, and they have become corrupt. Some prelates of this solemn assembly can bear witness that in Belgium and Germany, where the clergy are poor, priests are yet to be found who are worthy of governing the people. It is there that we must seek for bishops capable of judging wisely erring ecclesiastics, and not at Rome, where the balance of justice does not incline but under the weight of gold, where study is prescribed and ignorance crowned. There is not one at Rome, it is notorious, who knows enough of letters to qualify him for a doorkeeper. With that face shall he presume to teach who has never learned? If King Hugh's ambassadors could have bribed the Pope and Crescentius, his affairs had taken a different turn. The proud Gelasius said that the Roman pontiff should govern the whole world, and that mortals had no right to demand an account from him of the least of his actions. Who then gives us a pope whose equity is infallible? Can one believe that the Holy Spirit suddenly inspires him whom we elevate to the pontificate, and that he refuses his light to the other bishops who have been named? Has not Gregory written to the contrary, that bishops were all equal, so long as they fulfilled the duties of a Christian? If the arms of the barbarians prevent us from going to the holy city, or if the pontiff should be subjected to the oppression of a tyrant, would we then be obliged to hold no more assemblies? And would the prelates of all the kingdoms be constrained to condemn their princes, to execute the orders of an enemy who held the supreme see? The Council of Nice commands us to hold ecclesiastical assemblies twice a year, without speaking at all of the Pope, and the Apostle commands us not to listen even to an angel who would wish to oppose the words of Scripture. Let us follow then these sacred laws, and ask for nothing from that Rome which is abandoned to every vice, and which God will soon engulf in a sea of sulphur and brimstone. Since the fall of the empire, it has lost the churches of Alexandria and Antioch, those of Asia and Africa. Soon Europe will escape from it. The interior of Spain no longer recognizes its judgments. Italy and Germany despise the popes, the man of sin, the mystery of iniquity. Let Gaul cease to submit to the disgraceful yoke of Rome, and then will be accomplished that revolt of the nations of which the Scriptures speak. Gerbert himself was elected Archbishop of Reims in place of the deposed prelate. The Pope, by counsel of his Roman clergy, issued a bull annulling the ordination of Gerbert and putting the see of Reims under an interdict. Gerbert tore to pieces the bull and forbade the clergy to respect the interdict. In 995, the Pope sent a legate into France to execute on the spot the decree of the Pope, and in 996, rather than to persist in an interminable war, Gerbert let them have the Pope's way and retired to the court of Otto III. Under John XV in 993 was begun the papal custom of canonizing saints, which is but a papal form that corresponds to the pagan Roman custom of deifying their heroes, placing them among the gods. When John XV died, Otto III was in Italy, and he appointed as pope his nephew Bruno, 24 years old, who took the title of Gregory V, 996. But as soon as Otto had left Italy, the new pope was driven out by Crescentius, who set up as pope a certain Philagathus, Archbishop of Placenza, who took the name of John XVI in 997. Otto returned from Germany. John XVI fled, but was captured, and with the usual dreadful mutilations was either exiled or executed, and Gregory V, 997, was reinstated and reigned undisturbed till his death February 18, 999. In 998, the Emperor Otto III had appointed Gerbert to the archbishopric of Ravenna, and now that Gregory was dead, the emperor appointed Gerbert to the vacant pontificate. He took the title of Sylvester II, April 999 to May 12, 1003. At the installation of Gerbert, the emperor issued the following decree: We declare Rome to be the capital of the world, the Roman Church the mother of the churches. But the dignity of the Roman Church has been obscured by her neglectful and ignorant pontiffs. They have alienated the property of the Church without the city to the dregs of mankind. These were the feudatory princes of the Roman states, made everything venal, and so despoiled the very altars of the apostles. These prelates have thrown all law into confusion. They have endeavored to retrieve their own dilapidations by the spoliation of us. They have abandoned their own rights to usurp those of the empire. Otto declared that the immense donations of Constantine and Charlemagne to the papacy were prodigal and unwise. Nevertheless, he himself added to all the donations made by all the emperors before him, yet 8 counties of Italy, out of gratitude to his friend Gerbert. Otto III was poisoned and died in Rome January 22, 1002. The next year, May 12, 1003, Sylvester died and was succeeded by John the 17th, whose reign continued only from June to December 1003. He was succeeded by John the 18th, December 25, 1003 to May 31, 1009. He by Sergius IV, June 1009 to June 1012, and he by Benedict VIII, 1012 to 1024. Benedict was driven out by a certain Gregory, who took the chair as pope. Benedict fled to Germany to the protection of Henry II. Henry sent troops to accompany him to Italy. Gregory was then driven out, and Benedict VIII was again seated. In 1014, Henry went to Rome to be crowned emperor by the pope. Henry confirmed all the donations of the emperors from Charlemagne to Otto III, and added to them yet more. After Henry had gone from Italy, the Saracens made an inroad and overspread all the coast of Tuscany. Benedict put himself at the head of an army and marched against him. The expedition was successful, many of the Saracens were slain, and the chief's wife was captured and delivered to the Pope, who cut off her head and stripped her body of its gold and jewels of the value of 1,000 pounds, and sent them as a present to the Emperor Henry. On Good Friday, 1017, there was a heavy storm that continued through the following day, during which an earthquake was felt. The Pope, having been informed that some Jews were worshipping in their synagogue at the time, caused them all to be put to death, after which, says the historian of the time, the storm fell and there was no more earthquake. About 1020, Benedict held a council at Pavia, at the opening of which he read a long discourse in which he strongly censured the licentious lives of the clergy. He accused the priests of dissipating in orgies the property they had received by the liberality of kings, and of employing the revenues of the church in the support of their prostitutes. He invoked against them the canons of Nice, which recommended to ecclesiastics to preserve continence, and prohibited them from living with concubines. Finally, he called to their remembrance the decrees of St. Saricius and St. Leo, who condemned the marriage of priests and even of subdeacons. He went even beyond this, and made a decree divided into 7 articles to prohibit ecclesiastics from having wife or concubine. He extended it to all the clergy, regular and secular, without exception. He declared that the children of ecclesiastics should be regarded as serfs and should belong to the dioceses, although the mothers were free women. When in opposition to this, the scriptures were cited which permit marriage, he declared that this was not intended to apply to priests, but to laymen, and that those who should maintain this heresy should be excommunicated. Benedict VIII was succeeded by his brother John, who bribed his way to the throne and reigned as Pope John the 19th, 1024 to 1033. In 1027 he crowned as Emperor Conrad II, King of Germany, King Canute of England and King Rudolph of Burgundy being present and assisting in the ceremony. There were present also the archbishops of Milan and Ravenna. Each of these archbishops claimed the dignity of occupying the place at the right hand of the emperor. The Archbishop of Ravenna boldly put himself in that place, but by the direction of the Pope, the emperor withdrew his hand from that of the archbishop and called the bishop of Vercelli to his right hand. But the Archbishop of Ravenna would not yield. The dispute became a fight amongst the partisans of the 2 archbishops. The party of Ravenna was defeated. A council then took up the question and gravely discussed it, and finally decided that the honor of a place at the right hand of the emperor or of the pope should belong to the Archbishop of Milan. But the Archbishop of Ravenna rejected the decision. John the 19th was succeeded by his nephew Theophylactus. He was a favorite of the Counts of Tusculum, who by intrigues, money, and threats procured for him the papal throne, though he was only about 10 or 12 years of age. He took the name of Benedict IX, 1033. He made himself so odious by his vices and depredations that he was driven out of Rome. He was reinstated in 1038 by the Emperor Conrad II. Pope Victor III declared that Benedict IX was the successor of Simon the Sorcerer, rather than of Simon the Apostle, and that he led a life so shameful, so foul and execrable, that he shuddered to describe it. He ruled like a captain of banditti, rather than a prelate. Adulteries, homicides perpetrated by his own hand, passed unnoticed, unrevenged. For the patrician of the city, Gregory, was the brother of the Pope. Another brother, Peter, an active partisan. In 1044, Benedict had again become so unbearable that again he was driven out, and another, who took the title of Sylvester III, was set up in his stead. But in 3 months the new pope was driven out, and Benedict IX was again restored. This time, in order that he might continue his dissipations without the danger of being driven out, after the manner of the emperors of earlier Rome's worst days, Benedict IX deliberately sold the office of pope to John, his own archpriest, for £15,000. This John was said to be the most religious man in Rome. He was enthroned and ordained by Benedict himself, who had sold to him the papacy, and he reigned as John the 20th, 1045. And now Sylvester III, who had been driven out by Benedict IX, came back with a strong force and took possession of the Vatican as pope. Benedict IX, also, having dissipated the money for which he had sold the office of pope, gathered a force and drove out of the Lateran palace John, to whom he had sold the papacy, and whom he himself had ordained, and set himself up again as pope in the Lateran. John established himself in Santa Maria Maggiore. Then these three, Sylvester III, Benedict IX, and John the 20th, finding that in their rivalry they could not fare so well as they desired, joined their interests, and unitedly put up the papacy at public auction to the highest bidder. The papacy was bought this time by John Gratian, a priest who had heaped up enormous wealth for pious uses, one of which uses, he said, was his own advancement, and another was that, by distributing it in general bribery, he should restore to people their right of election. This new buyer of the papacy reigned as Pope Gregory VI, 1045 to 1046. But he was deposed by the Emperor Henry III and a council. Then the emperor asked the council to name another man for pope. But the assembled clergy declared that there was not a man among the Roman clergy whom they could by any means recommend. The emperor then selected the Bishop of Bamberg in Germany, who was in his train. This man was immediately consecrated Pope Clement II, December 25, 1046, to October 9, 1047. Clement crowned Henry III as emperor the same day that he himself was made pope. He also immediately assembled a council to reform the Roman clergy. He proposed the deposition of all the bishops who had bought their way to the episcopate. But he was informed by the council that to do so, the church would be undone, because there would not be left enough clergy to conduct the services in the churches. All that could be done was to enact canons forbidding the practice, and this by clergy who were all guilty of it. The thing that occupied most of the attention of the council was another dispute between the Archbishop of Milan and the Archbishop of Ravenna, as to which should occupy the place of honor at the right hand of the Pope. Again, after much discussion and grave deliberation, the question was decided, this time in favor of the Archbishop of Ravenna. On the death of Clement III, the papacy was again seized by Benedict IX, November 8, 1047, to July 17, 1048, who had twice sold the papacy at auction. But the Emperor Henry III Having chosen and sent to Rome to be pope a certain Papanius of Bavaria, Benedict yielded to the emperor's power, and Papanius reigned 23 days as Pope Damasus II, July 16 to August 8, 1048. Upon the death of Damasus, the emperor assembled a council in Germany, at Worms, to elect a pope, and Bishop Bruno of Toul was chosen. He arrived in Rome at the end of the year 1048, and was enthroned as Leo IX, February 2, 1049 to April 13, 1054. He, too, assembled a council to reform the Roman clergy. Again it was proposed to depose all who had bought their way to holy orders. But again this purpose had to be abandoned, because to do so would inevitably dissolve the Church, as they declared it would subvert the Christian religion. The new pope therefore had to be content with the confirming of the decrees of Clement III, which imposed penalties and fines and prohibited it for the future. This course was readily approved by the council of confessed bribers. Leo next thought to push his reforming zeal amongst the clergy in France and Germany. He held a great council at Rheims. There, likewise, as already twice in Rome, the first important thing to be decided was a dispute between archbishops, this time of Rheims and of Treves, as to which should have the honor of sitting at the right hand of the Pope. Leo, not knowing how many more claimants there might be, cut the knot by having them all sit in a circle, with himself in the center. By this council very little more was done than by the councils that had already been held at Rome. After Leo had returned to Rome, Peter Damiani addressed a letter to him, asking for instruction in relation to the scandalous conduct of the clergy of his province, in which he said, "We have prelates who openly abandon themselves to all kinds of debauchery, get drunk at their feasts, mount on horseback, and keep their concubines in the episcopal palaces. These unworthy ministers push the faithful into the abyss, and the mere priests have fallen into an excess of corruption, without our being able to exclude them from sacred orders. The priesthood is so despised that we are obliged to recruit ministers for the service of God from among simoniacs, adulterers, and murderers. Formerly, the apostle declared worthy of death not only those who committed crimes, but even those who tolerated them. What would he say if he could return to earth and see the clergy of our days? The depravity is so great now that the priests sin with their own children. These wretches make a pretext of the rules of the court of Rome, and as they have a tariff for crimes, they commit them in all safety of conscience." Peter complained of the lightness and the inequality of these tariffs, and then declared further, "I declare that the popes who framed these miserable laws are responsible to God for all the disorders of the Church. For the decrees of the Synod of Ankara condemn to 25 years of penance mere laymen who are guilty of the sin of the flesh. St. Basil and Pope Saricius declared every one suspected of these crimes unworthy of the priesthood. I hope, then, Your Holiness, after having consulted the legislation of the Church and the doctors, will make a decision which will repress the disorders of our priests." The only instruction that Leo was able to send in this matter was that the sins which Peter had censored deserved to be punished with all the rigor of the penitential laws, and by the deprivation of orders, but that the number of guilty clerics rendered that proceeding impracticable, and obliged him to preserve even the criminal in the Church. Some Normans had penetrated into Italy and had taken possession of the province of Apulia. Leo IX led in person an army to drive them out and take possession of that province for the papacy. June 16, 1053, his army was utterly routed, and he was taken prisoner. The Normans were all devout Catholics, and though a prisoner, Leo was allowed still to conduct the affairs of the papacy. The Patriarch of Constantinople had written a letter in which he mentioned some points of difference between the Roman Church and the Eastern Church. This letter was brought to the attention of Leo, whereupon he wrote to the Patriarch as follows: "They assure me, unworthy prelate, that you push your audacity so far as openly to condemn the Latin Church because it celebrates the Eucharist with unleavened bread. According to your opinion, the Roman pontiff, after exercising sovereign power for 10 entire centuries, should learn from the Bishop of Constantinople the proper mode of honoring their divine master. Are you ignorant, then, that the popes are infallible, that no man has the right to judge them, and that it belongs to the Holy See to condemn or absolve kings and people? Constantine himself decreed that it was unworthy of the divine majesty that the priest to whom God had given the empire of heaven should be submissive to the princes of the earth. Not only did he give to Sylvester and his successors temporal authority, but he even granted to them ornaments, officers, guards, and all the honors attached to the imperial dignity. In order that you may not accuse us of establishing our sway through ignorance and falsehood, we send you a copy of the privileges which Constantine had granted to the Roman Church." The Emperor of the East, Constantine Monocamus, wrote to Leo a very favorable letter, to which the Pope replied thus: "Prince, we praise you for having bowed before our supreme power, and for having been the first to propose to re-establish concord between your empire and our Church. For in these deplorable times all Christians should unite to exterminate that strange nation which wishes to raise itself up in opposition to us, the Vicar of God. These Normans, our common enemies, have put to death our faithful soldiers beneath their swords. They have invaded the patrimony of St. Peter without regarding the holiness of our residence. They have forced convents, massacred monks, violated virgins, and burned churches. These savage people, the enemies of God and man, have resisted the prayers, threats, and anathemas of the Holy See. These barbarians, hardened by pillage and murder, no more fear the divine vengeance. We have been obliged to call in aid from all sides to tame these northern hordes, and we ourselves, at the head of an army, have wished to march against them, and to unite with your faithful servant, the Duke of Argyra, in order to confer with him about driving them from Italy. But these incarnate demons suddenly attacked us, cut all our troops to pieces, and seized upon our sacred person. Their victory, however, has inspired them with great fear, and they doubt lest Christian princes should come to crush them and free us from their hands. We will not falter in the holy mission which God has confided to us. We will not cease to excite other people against them in order to exterminate this evil race. We will not imitate our predecessors, those mercenary bishops, who were more engaged with their own debaucheries than with the interests of the Roman Church. For our part, it is our desire to re-establish the Holy See in its former splendor, and we will spare neither gold nor blood to render our throne worthy of the majesty of God. Already is the Emperor Henry, our dear son, advancing to our aid with a powerful army, and we hope that you yourself will soon cover the Bosphorus with your sails, for the purpose of disembarking your soldiers on the shores of Apulia. What ought I now to hope with such powerful aid for the glory of the Holy See?" In another letter to the Patriarch of Constantinople he said, "It is said you are a neophyte, and have not mounted by the proper steps to the episcopate. It is said that you have dared to menace the patriarchs of Alexandria and Antioch, with depriving them of their ancient prerogatives, in order to subjugate them to your sway, and that by a sacrilegious usurpation you take the title of universal bishop, which only belongs to the Bishop of Rome. Thus, in your pride, you dare to compare yourself with us, and to contest our infallibility in contempt of the decisions of the Fathers and Orthodox councils, and even against the Apostles. Finally, you persecute the faithful who receive the Eucharist with unleavened bread, under the pretext that Jesus Christ used leavened bread in instituting the sacrament of the altar. I forewarn you, then, that your impious doctrines will be anathematized by our legates, and that your conduct will be publicly condemned if you persist in refusing to take the oath of obedience to us." The Patriarch would not yield to the Pope. The Emperor tried to compel to submit, but he told the Emperor that he might remove him from the Patriarchate, but that no power on earth could ever make him betray his trust by subjecting the see of the imperial city of Constantinople to that of Rome. Accordingly, the threat made by Leo was carried out by his legates in Constantinople July 16, 1054, in their pronouncing a long arraignment and excommunication of the Patriarch of Constantinople, and all who should thenceforth receive the sacrament administered by any Greek who found fault with the sacrifice or Mass of the Latins. A few days afterward that sentence was followed by another in the words, "Whoever shall find fault with the faith of the Holy See of Rome and its sacrifice, let him be anathematized, and not looked upon as a Christian Catholic, but as a proselyte heretic. Fiat, fiat, fiat." However, before these excommunications were actually pronounced, Leo's career had ended, he having died April 19, 1054. The people of Rome would not take any steps toward the election of a new pope without the express directions of the emperor. They therefore sent a subdeacon, Hildebrand, to the emperor in Germany to ask him to name the one whom he should consider most worthy. Hildebrand had already in his own mind decided as to who should be chosen, one to whom it was hardly possible that the emperor could object, Gebhard, bishop of Eichstatt, the emperor's chief counselor. Hildebrand drew to his scheme the prelates of Germany, who begged the emperor to nominate Gebhard. Gebhard was chosen and was installed as Pope Victor II, April 13, 1055 to July 28, 1057. In 1056, the Emperor Henry III, finding that his end was drawing near, called the Pope to him in Germany. The Emperor committed to the Pope the care of his young son, Henry IV, then about 5 years old, and died October 5. The emperor's widow was named as regent during her young child's minority, but with Pope Victor as the chief counselor of the widow, and also practically the child's guardian, the pope was practically emperor as well as actually pope. And this was recognized by the pope, for the ambition of Victor rose with his power, his grants assumed a loftier tone, the apostolic throne of Peter, the chief of the apostles, is raised high above all people and all realms, that he may pluck up and destroy, plant and build in his name. But he suddenly died at Arezzo, and with him expired all these magnificent schemes of universal rule. He was succeeded by Frederick of Lorraine, who had been chancellor of the papacy and one of the legates to Constantinople to pronounce against the Patriarch of Constantinople the excommunication launched by Leo IX. Frederick reigned as Pope Stephen X, August 2, 1057 to March 29, 1058. The new pope attempted to reform the clergy and held several councils on the subject, but as with former attempts, all that was done was to enact canons condemning their practices. He appointed to the cardinalate Peter Damiani, the monk who had written so plainly to Leo IX of the condition of the clergy. And as cardinal, Peter still kept up his exposure of the evil practices of the clergy. He wrote, "Ecclesiastical discipline is everywhere abandoned. The canons of the Church are trampled underfoot. Priests only labor to satisfy their cupidity or to abandon themselves to incontinence. The duties of the episcopate only consist in wearing garments covered with gold and precious stones, in enveloping oneself in precious furs, in possessing race horses in the stables, and in sallying forth with a numerous escort of armed horsemen. Prelates should, on the contrary, set an example for the purity of their morals and all Christian virtues. Misfortunes turn on those who lead a condemnable life, and anathemas on those who intrigue for the dignity of bishops for a guilty end. Shame on ecclesiastics who abandon their country, follow the armies of kings, and become the courtiers of princes, to obtain in their turn the power of commanding men and of subjugating them to their sway. These corrupt priests are more sensitive to terrestrial dignities than to the celestial recompenses promised by the Savior, and to obtain bishoprics they sacrifice their souls and bodies. It would, however, be better for them openly to purchase the episcopal sees, for simony is less a crime than hypocrisy. Their impure hands are always open to receive presents from the faithful. Their heads are always at work to invent new means of squeezing the people, and their viper tongues are prodigal by day and night of flattery to tyrants. Thus I declare the bishops who have become the slaves of kings, 3 times simoniacal, and thrice damned. Before his death, Stephen had required the clergy to promise that they would not choose a pope before the return of Hildebrand, who was then in Germany. But no sooner was Stephen dead than a strong party led by the counts of Tusculum chose the bishop of Velletri, and against the opposition of the cardinals, they by night installed him as Pope Benedict X, April to December 1058. But when Hildebrand returned from Germany, he caused the Archbishop of Florence to be elected pope, who took the title of Nicholas II, January 1059 to July 22, 1061. Thus, again, there were 2 popes at once. Peter Damiani, being asked which of these was the true pope, who should be obeyed, replied, "He who is now upon the Holy See was enthroned at night by troops of armed men, who caused him to be elected by distributing money among the clergy. On the day of his nomination, the patines, the holy pyxes, and the crucifix from the treasury of St. Peter were sold throughout the city. His election was then violent and simoniacal. He alleges in his justification that he was forced to accept the pontificate, and I would not affirm that it is not so, for our pope is so stupid that it would not be at all extraordinary if he were ignorant of the intrigues which the counts of Tuscanella have carried on in his name. He is guilty, however, for remaining in the abyss into which he has been cast, and for being ordained by an archpriest whose ignorance is so great that he cannot read a line without spelling every syllable. Although the election of Nicholas II was not entirely regular, I would submit more willingly to the authority of this pontiff, because he is sufficiently literary, possesses an active mind, pure morals, and is filled with charity. Still, if the other pope could compose a line, I would not say a psalm, not even a homily. I would not oppose him, and would kiss his feet." A council was called by Nicholas at Florence, which was attended by the cardinals and most of the bishops of Italy, to consider how to gain possession of the papal throne in Rome. The council unanimously declared Nicholas to have been lawfully elected, and passed a sentence of excommunication upon Benedict X. And since Nicholas and his council had the support of Duke Godfrey of Lorraine as the representative of the emperor, Benedict yielded without any further contest. The excommunication was removed. He was deposed from the priesthood, and was required to spend the rest of his days in a monastery. Nicholas assembled a council in Rome, and made the usual endeavor to reform the clergy, and with the usual results. With regard to those who had bribed their way to clerical office, he was obliged to confess, "As to those who have been ordained for money, our clemency permits them to preserve the dignities to which they have been promoted, because the multitude of these ecclesiastics is so great that by observing the rigor of the canons with regard to them, we should leave almost all the churches without priests. By this council the election of the Pope was taken from the populace, and even from the clergy in general, and was confined to the cardinals, though there was left to the people a vague sort of right of approval. A heavy curse was laid by the council upon whomsoever should disregard this new law. They declared against him an irrevocable excommunication, and that he should be counted among the wicked to all eternity, and closed with the following words: May he endure the wrath of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and that of St. Peter and St. Paul in this life and the next. May his house be desolate, and no one dwell in his tents. Be his children orphans, his wife a widow, his sons outcasts and beggars. May the usurer consume his substance, the stranger reap his labors. May all the world and all the elements war upon him, and the merits of all the saints which sleep in the Lord confound and inflict visible vengeance during this life. Whosoever, on the other hand, shall keep this law, by the authority of St. Peter, is absolved from all his sins. Nicholas made peace with the Normans, to the great advantage of the papacy, both spiritually and temporally. For to the Pope, the famous Norman Robert Guiscard took the following oath of fealty: I, Robert, by the grace of God and St. Peter, Duke of Apulia and Calabria, and future Duke of Sicily, promise to pay to St. Peter, to you, Pope Nicholas, my lord, to your successors, or to you and their nuncios, 12 deniers, money of Pavia for each yoke of oxen, as an acknowledgment for all the lands that I myself hold and possess, or have given to be held and possessed by any of the Ultramontanes. And this sum shall be yearly paid on Easter Sunday by me, my heirs and successors, to you, Pope Nicholas, my lord, and to your successors. So help me God, and these his holy Gospels. Upon the death of Nicholas, the clergy and people were again divided into two powerful factions, each vigorously striving for the power that accrued in the electing of the Pope. Neither party being able to prevail at once, messengers were sent into Germany to the court of the child emperor, to have the imperial council to name a man to be pope. But for some reason, the messengers could not obtain an audience at the imperial court, and were obliged to return with the seals of their letters unbroken. Hildebrand then took the bold step of having a pope elected without any word at all from the imperial court, and the new pope was duly installed as Alexander II, October 7, 1061, to April 21, 1073. The opposing faction sent off messengers to the emperor. A council was assembled at Basel, which declared Alexander deposed, and then elected as his successor the Bishop of Parma, who was proclaimed and consecrated Pope Honorius II, October 28, 1061 to 1066. This Honorius is described by Cardinal Damiani as having been plainly a disturber of the Church, the overturner of apostolic discipline, the enemy of human salvation, the root of sin, the herald of the devil, the apostle of Antichrist, and what should I say more? He is an arrow from the quiver of Satan, the staff of azure, a son of Belial, the son of perdition, who is opposed and exalted above all that is called God or that is worshipped. The gulf of lewdness, the shipwreck of chastity, the opprobrium of Christianity, the ignominy of the priesthood, the progeny of vipers, the stench of the world, the smut of the race, the disgrace of the universe, a slippery serpent, a crooked snake, a sink of crime, the dregs of vice, the abomination of heaven, outcast from paradise, food for Tartarus, the stubble of eternal fire. This does not exhaust the list of expletives applied by the Cardinal to the new Pope, but it is sufficient to give an idea of the character of Honorius II or of Cardinal Damiani himself, possibly of both. There being now two popes, the next thing to be settled, of course, was which should be Pope alone. Honorius II, with an army, marched from Basel direct to Rome. Pope Alexander fled, but Duke Godfrey, who had espoused his cause, met the army of Honorius and defeated it. Honorius himself was taken prisoner, but bribed his captors and escaped. When Alexander learned of the defeat of Honorius, he returned to Rome and occupied the papal chair. Honorius had gathered a stronger army, and in the spring of 1062 marched again into Italy, where he was received with joy by a large number of the bishops of the Lombard cities. The Bishop of Albi went to Rome as the emissary of Honorius and the ambassador of the emperor. He there steadily worked by speech and by money in the interests of Honorius. There was a great assembly in the Hippodrome, at which Pope Alexander appeared on horseback. There, in the presence of all, the Bishop of Albi denounced Pope Alexander II. "Thou hast obtained thy election to the popedom by the aid of Normans, robbers, and tyrants, and by notorious bribery. Hildebrand, that son of Simon Magus, was the chief agent in this detestable merchandise, for which ye have both incurred damnation before God and man." He commanded him to go to the court of the emperor to do penance. Alexander replied that in receiving the office of pope he had not broken his allegiance to the emperor, and that he would send his legate to the court of Henry. Then, amid the hootings of the crowd, "Away, leper! Out, wretch! Begone, hateful one!" Alexander rode away. The supporters of Alexander met bribery with bribery. Nevertheless, the Bishop of Albi was enabled to form in Rome a powerful party in support of Honorius, and meanwhile Honorius was marching with his army toward Rome. As he drew near, the army of Pope Alexander went out of the city to meet him. In the battle, Alexander's army was defeated, and was obliged to take refuge within the walls of Rome. The army of Honorius was not sufficiently powerful to force the gates or walls, and he camped in the territory of the Count of Tusculum, who was grandson of the famous Alberic, the son of Marozia. Just at this point, the Duke of Tuscany, who had not taken either side in this papal quarrel, appeared with an army more powerful than that of either pope, and demanded that hostilities should cease, and that the rival popes should retire, each to his city, and await the decision of the emperor upon their rival claims. About this time also the partisans of Alexander in Germany had made a powerful stroke in his favor. The principal archbishops and nobles had, by force, taken the young emperor from the care of his mother into their own hands. And now, in his name, a council was assembled at Augsburg, at which Cardinal Damiani was the chief pleader in behalf of Alexander. He justified the action of the archbishops in setting aside the emperor's mother and taking him into their own control, by the argument that in temporal affairs the mother of the emperor might guide her son, but the Roman Church was the mother of the emperor in a higher sense, and as his rightful guardian was to act for him in spiritual concerns. The council decided in favor of Alexander II, and declared him the rightful pope to whom belonged all the powers of the papacy. However, Honorius was still alive, and had his friends and even his army, and one of his friends even held the castle of St. Angelo in Rome. In the spring of 1063, at the solicitation of his supporters in Rome, Honorius led his army again to that city. His faction held the gates of a portion of the city, and Honorius was enabled to enter the city without a battle. The troops of Alexander held the other parts of the city. A battle was fought. Honorius was defeated and took refuge in the castle of St. Angelo, where he maintained himself for 2 years. Rome had 2 popes with their armed troops glaring defiance at each other from opposite quarters of the city. The spiritual thunders, each of course, and each in his synod, had hurled his direst excommunication at the other, were drowned in the louder din of arms. In May 1064, another council was assembled to decide the question again as to who was rightful pope. This council met at Mantua in Lombardy. The rival popes were summoned to appear at the council. Alexander, knowing that the managers of the council were favorable to him, went. Honorius refused to go, declaring that no power could rightly summon him, as his election had been regularly accomplished by a council and confirmed by the imperial authority. The council declared Alexander II to be legitimate pope. A portion of the army of Honorius raided the city of Mantua while the council was sitting. But Duke Godfrey had accompanied Alexander with an army, guaranteeing his safety, and these drove out the soldiers of Honorius. The episcopal partisans of Honorius in Lombardy deserted his cause and begged the forgiveness of the council. But Honorius II still held to his title of pope unto the day of his death in 1066, and Alexander II reigned in papal peace for 7 years until April 21, 1073, when he also died and was succeeded by the monk Hildebrand as Pope Gregory VII.